In this episode of the Encounter Report, 5 stars of legend shine bright in Suikoden 1. There's Axelrod, your humble narrator, who did a blind playthrough of the original game on the PlayStation 3. Alongside him is Deolite, who did a Second Plus playthrough on the original game on the PlayStation 1. There's also Mr. JRPG, who did a Second Plus playthrough of the remaster on the Nintendo Switch. Armored Priest, who did a Second Plus playthrough of the remaster on the PlayStation 5, and Tempo Tom, the current world record holder for the 100%, 108-star glitchless speedrun of the original game as of writing, played on the PlayStation TV. Each of us played on the default difficulty with the exception of Mr. JRPG, who played on hard, and Armored Priest, who played on normal. And with all that out of the way, Tyr will walk into the tavern and recruit us any minute now. First up are battle types, and there's some encounter spread present, but not across versions of the game played, which I think is interesting. Both Armored Priest and myself have the highest total encounters and time spent in encounters, while Mr. JRPG and Deolite are fairly close together. However, the total time spent in encounters does have a similar difference between these two splits, which I find fascinating. Tempo Tom actually manages to engage in a significant amount more encounters than expected, but also pushes extremely fast boss times. Even with Deolite, Mr. JRPG, and Armored Priest playing the game with prior knowledge, their times come out significantly behind. Certainly something to be expected when comparing a speedrun, but seeing it in action is another story. For battle locations, we can see encounters split up based on where they took place. Immediately, we can see that the world map encounter differences are going in every direction. Armored Priest has nearly 300 of them and actually manages to spend more time in those encounters than everyone else combined. Mr. JRPG has 50 more encounters than I do, yet only spent approximately 5 more minutes in those encounters, while Deolite has 13 less than I do and spends almost half as much time in them. Then there's run percent, which largely explains how some of our times are as low as they are. Tempo Tom breaks the 70% threshold for dungeon and world map encounters, while Deolite and Mr. JRPG have the next highest in double digits. Combat types are up next to see how encounters concluded, and it's here where we can look into those encounters ran from. Everyone partook in a solid amount, and surprisingly, I have the lowest number. I also find it interesting that Tempo Tom has more than double the amount of encounters ran from, yet comes out with a lower total time for run encounters than I do. For deaths, we can award Tempo Tom the much coveted No Deaths medal. Speedrun or not, things can sometimes slip away from us or happen on purpose, and that didn't occur for this run. For the rest of us though, I died on the Sonya fight as I wasn't expecting a second battle. Deolite had an unfortunate death on his very first encounter on the world map, which was due to a wild boar and 2 crows making an appearance when he only had Tyr and Ted. Mr. JRPG died on the zombie dragon boss fight because that fight is a jerk, while Armored Priest died on the second encounter of the game. He too ran into a wild boar, but in this case only had Tyr in the party. We have subtypes up next for a brief amount of time to display everyone's grinding, and my goodness, Armored Priest engaged in so much of it. So much in fact that it sets a new record for grinding, beating out an encounter percent of 37 from Shining Resonance and 212 encounters from Golden Sun: The Lost Age. Regrettably, it wasn't easy to discern the purpose of the grind, but it felt like much of it was for money and levels. Notably, 92 encounters were for the Nameless Urn and 28 were for the Opal. For the rest of us, it was mostly some quick levels, money, 9 encounters for Mr. JRPG to get the Nameless Urn, or 2 encounters for Tempo Tom to get the Holy Crystal. We've also got the level progression graph for each person. On the left, we have the levels, and on the bottom, each boss in the game. Each boss takes up a rectangle in the graph, and within those rectangles, we have Tyr's levels for each participant when that boss was defeated. Here we can see some unique qualities to Suikoden 1, namely its experience gains. Both Deolite and Armored Priest took a trip with Ted to get a crystal, and by the time they fought the Golem boss, were significantly higher level than everyone else. However, by the Zombie Dragon, those advantages tapered off significantly, and by Necklord, they were surpassed. For reference, Deolite and Armored Priest took 101 and 131 encounters respectively to reach Zombie Dragon, while I had 76, Mr. JRPG 122, and Tempo Tom 45, of which 13 were fights he got experience on. Next up is the boss encounter time graph. On the left, we have the time, and on the bottom, each boss in the game. Each boss takes up a rectangle, and within those rectangles, the length of time it took each person to defeat the boss on their latest kill attempt. While we've already seen the power of speedrunning, here we can actually see just how quickly things can be done, or slow in my case. My zombie dragon fight was a true nail-biter where I had one character left and was on the brink of death, but squeaked it out. Mr. JRPG's Sonya fight also took a turn for the worse when Victor and Pesmerga died, causing him to scrap it out for a lot longer than he had hoped. Despite those spikes though, everyone was in the general area for most bosses. Armored Priest even managed to get fairly close to Tempo Tom's Golem fight alongside Barkus and Sidonia. Regrettably, none of us could get that close again for the rest of the game, but Daylight wasn't that far off on the Sonya fight. Following that is Recruitment Order, where I thought it would be interesting to see the order everyone recruited various characters. This only includes the 78 characters that can be used in encounters and are shown in order of when that character becomes available for use. So this means that prior to the Blinking Mirror, you needed to enter the town of Kaku, and after the Blinking Mirror, not be in a dungeon. These are going to cycle by pretty quickly, but you'll see some outliers like me not recruiting Sergei early on, meaning I didn't have an elevator, or how Daylight, Mr. JRPG, and Armored Priest all had the same general idea for how they would route their recruits. In fact, I found it quite fascinating how late most people wait to get to Blinking Mirror, considering it's probably the most valuable item in the game. And once Kimberly was recruited, more of us started getting in line with who was being recruited when. Although I found it really fascinating how the route goes for the speedrun, as characters like Morgan are left for very late despite them being recruitable immediately upon having access to them. A supersized party composition is up next, and well, there are 78 characters to go through, so we're changing the layout here, going microscopic, and are going to cycle them by pretty quickly as well, so I encourage you to pause where needed. I will be listing these characters in alphabetical order, and if someone used a character, they will have a faint gray highlight for that respective box. One common element here is that for the most part, people are utilizing the same characters, and when outliers exist, it's primarily only a couple of fights. One main reason for this is the amount of forced party members throughout the game. There aren't many opportunities to use 5 characters of your choice, and no opportunities exist like that for boss battles. So, most of us largely kept the same party because by the end, we only had 3 slots to use when Tyr, Victor, and Flick were required. Having said that though, Daylight never used Luke, while I was most prone to experimentation and used a decent chunk of characters. Mr. JRPG was the only person to use Kai despite the powerful Unite attack, and nobody used the legendary Ronnie Bell, which I'm sure has our very own difficulty diplomat ringing the bell of shame. Armored Priest had very few deviations, but was one of the only people who swapped in Pesmerga at the end. Tempo Tom was also one of the people to use Stallion, which I was surprised so few people used. The number of enemies is also continuing the tradition of cycling on by. Suikoden 1 had the rare 6 enemies per fight alongside 6 party members, so the distribution is pretty wide. I'd also take a look at the encounter percent here, as 1, 2, and 3 enemy encounters don't predominantly make up the bulk of the encounters like other games have in the past. Instead, 4 and 5 enemies get their own fair share of the percentage, and even 6 enemies have respectable values. And to wrap everything up, here are the final combined stats. It's very fascinating to see myself, Mr. JRPG, and Armored Priest all have a very close encounter percent, while Daylight and Tempo Tom share that same comparison. This was also the first time I've got to track speedrun metrics, and I found it incredibly rewarding to see the vast differences a more casual playthrough has in comparison. I got to see all these little quirks that I definitely didn't understand, but got to witness the results of them for a cool window into the speedrunning process. I also found it very interesting that the differences aren't as pronounced between the original and the remaster. I think it's very easy to say the remaster is a quicker experience, since they improved item management, allow you to run in towns and dungeons, and also have a fast forward option for auto battles. Of everyone here, Mr. JRPG was the only person I caught using it, but it was only for one encounter and was very briefly used to showcase it existed. The remaster also has some layout changes which are ultimately pretty minor, but the biggest thing is revealing Crowley's presence. And while we're here, I'll also throw it out there that Daylight walked literally everywhere. He never used Stallion for the world map and never equipped the Holy Crystal. A true patient gamer right there. And that's the Suikoden 1 Encounter Report. I hope you visit everyone's channels and social media to praise them for all this wonderful data. With another report done, we're still waiting for Tyr to come recruit us. At this rate, maybe we should just put our hopes in Ryu. Thanks for watching, appreciate it, see you on the next video.